So how does a massive, completely united struggle for independence end up transforming into a deeply divided, bleeding subcontinent? In this explainer, we're tackling what is definitely one of the most defining and consequential moments in modern history. We're going to rely purely on the facts and the historical record here, looking at this as objectively as possible and stripping away the intense emotions that usually cloud this topic.
And that brings us to the core analytical question we really have to ask ourselves right up front. Was the partition actually inevitable? It's a question people are still passionately debating over 77 years later. Today, we're going to uncover the intricate sequence of historical facts, those shifting political strategies, and the precise decisions that ultimately led to this massive fracture. So, here's our roadmap. We'll be moving through 4 chronological phases: the seeds of division, the rise of identity politics, the point of no return, and finally, a hasty and bloody partition. Let's jump right in.
Part 1, the seeds of division. We'll take a quick look at the demographics and British strategy here.
To really understand this, we need to look at the sheer demographic reality of British India at the time. We're talking about a massive population, roughly 380 million people. Now, about 65% of that population was Hindu and 27% was Muslim. But here's the critical geographical detail you have to keep in mind. That Muslim minority wasn't just spread out evenly. They were heavily concentrated in the northwest, in places like Punjab and Sindh, and over in the northeast, in Bengal. As whispers of independence started growing, this specific demographic spread actually sparked some serious fears among Muslim leaders. They were genuinely worried about what living under majoritarian rule in a brand new democratic system might look like for them.
And of course, the British strategy of divide and rule was incredibly calculated. They recognized the threat of a united front early on. So in 1905, Viceroy Lord Curzon actually partitioned the massive province of Bengal. He quite intentionally split the Hindu majority west from the Muslim majority east. Now this sparked immense protest, but, well, it also sowed some incredibly deep religious divides. Literally just 1 year later, in 1906, the All India Muslim League was formed in Dhaka, specifically to represent Muslim political interests. And by 1909, the British introduced a policy that would basically change everything.
That major turning point was the separate electorate, which they granted in 1909. Under this system, the British made sure that only Muslim voters could vote for Muslim candidates in certain areas. Think about what that does. It completely shifted the dynamic. It basically ensured that Indian communities would actively compete against each other for political power rather than uniting together against the British Empire. I mean, it really was an absolute masterclass in colonial management.
Moving on to Part 2, the rise of identity politics. Let's trace the shifting stances and changing tides.
Honestly, nothing highlights this era better than the massive evolution of Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Early on, he started his political career entirely rejecting religious politics. He was a secular member of Congress, even famously dubbed the ambassador of Hindu-Muslim unity. But over time, things changed. Feeling completely sidelined and witnessing rising communal tensions, Jinnah transformed. He eventually completely reorganized the Muslim League and became the primary champion of the two nations theory, famously declaring that Hindus and Muslims were so fundamentally different they simply could not live together in one single country.
Then, World War II broke out, and that dramatically shifted the power dynamics across India. In 1939, the British pulled India into the war without even bothering to consult the Indian leadership. In massive protest, the Indian National Congress resigned from all their state government positions, and soon after that, a lot of them were thrown in jail during the Quit India movement. But the Muslim League, well, they saw an opening here. They offered completely unconditional support to the British war effort. So, with Congress leaders locked away in prison, the Muslim League gained immense favor and a lot of political ground with the British Empire.
Fast forward to after the war. The British held elections in 1946 to gauge who actually represented the Indian people at that point. While Congress swept the general seats, look at this. The Muslim League captured 425 out of the 482 Muslim reserve seats. Capturing over 90% of those seats proved absolutely undeniably to the British that the Muslim League and Jinnah were now the true, unquestionable representatives of Indian Muslims. There was no debating it anymore.
That brings us to Part 3, the point of no return. Let's look at the failed plans and the move to direct action.
So the British make one final, desperate attempt to keep India united. They propose the Cabinet Mission Plan of 1946. Now, this plan proposed absolutely no partition. Instead, it suggested a three-tiered system with a really weak central government that would only handle basic national duties like finance and foreign affairs, while giving massive, sweeping powers to regional groups of states. But it ultimately failed because of a fundamental deadlock. Congress desperately wanted a stronger central government to keep the new country stable, and they insisted the state groupings had to be optional. Jinnah, on the other hand, initially agreed to it, seeing a path to a larger future Pakistan. But then he backed out entirely when it became clear those groupings wouldn't actually be mandatory.
Following the complete breakdown of those negotiations, Jinnah makes a pivotal move. He called for Direct Action Day on August 16, 1946, essentially demanding that Muslims take to the streets to claim their right to Pakistan. And sadly, this call sparked the Great Calcutta killings and horrific nationwide riots that literally lasted for months. It was a completely terrifying breakdown of law and order, and it forced Congress leaders to a pretty grim realization. Keeping the country united might actually be completely impossible without triggering a full-blown civil war.
Feeling the immense pressure of these uncontrollable riots, plus their own post-war financial exhaustion, the British delivered a ticking clock. Prime Minister Clement Attlee announced that the UK would definitively leave India by June 1948, regardless of whether Indian politicians had reached a power-sharing agreement or not. Talk about turning up the heat. This terrified leaders on both sides. The very real threat of the British just packing up and leaving the country in a state of completely fractured chaos forced everyone to realize they had to compromise, and they had to do it fast.
Which leads us directly into Part 4, a hasty and bloody partition. Lines drawn in the sand.
So, Lord Mountbatten was sent to India to essentially speed up the exit. The finally accepted Mountbatten Plan conceded to Jinnah's demand for a separate Pakistan, but, and this is crucial, it also partitioned the massive provinces of Punjab and Bengal. Why? Because the significant Hindu and Sikh minorities living in those provinces absolutely refused to become part of the new Muslim state. This meant the two biggest, most diverse states in the entire country were about to be sliced right down the middle.
Now, this is a staggering historical fact. The literal boundaries dividing millions of lives, homes, and communities were drawn up in just 3 weeks. 3 weeks! And the man assigned to do it, Cyril Radcliffe, had never even visited India before in his life. He literally sat in a room using outdated paper maps and census data to draw lines that would slice right through the very heart of the subcontinent. The actual exit was a chilling display of mismanagement. Pakistan declared independence on August 14th, and India on the 15th. But the actual borders, the Radcliffe Line we just talked about, weren't officially announced until August 17th. I mean, think about that. People were out celebrating their independence for 2 whole days without even knowing which country their homes actually belonged to. When the lines were finally revealed, absolute chaos ensued.
And the human cost was just unfathomable. 1.5 to 2 million lives, 15 to 20 lakh people were lost. As people suddenly realized they were on the wrong side of the new border, the largest mass migration in human history began. Trains were filled with bodies. Horrific violence, riots, and unimaginable brutality took place as millions of people abandoned their ancestral homes to desperately cross into the newly drawn borders. Even long after the treaties were signed and the new governments were formed, the deep wounds remained. The trauma of those hastily drawn borders and the deeply entrenched identity politics continues to be a permanent, painful scar on the subcontinent, and it's something that is still impacting generations to this very day. All of this leaves us with a really profound question. Could different leadership have prevented this tragedy, or was partition just the inevitable, tragic cost of freedom? Keep asking those hard questions, keep looking at the facts, and thank you so much for joining us for this explainer.